The world was weary. By the summer of 1945, the great engine of global conflict had been grinding away. In Europe, the guns had finally fallen silent. But the war was not over. One ocean away, another conflict raged on with a ferocity. American military planners looked at the Japanese home islands and saw a fortress. They predicted an invasion would cost 1 million American lives. This was the grim reality facing the world leaders in August 1945. The Allied forces, led by the United States, stood at a terrible crossroads. Or they could turn to something new. A power capable of ending the war in a single blinding flash. A weapon of unprecedented destructive force was now ready. It would change the world forever. The story of this terrible new power began not on a battlefield, but in the quiet halls of science. It started with a letter. In 1939, as war clouds gathered over Europe, the brilliant physicist Albert Einstein wrote to US President Franklin D. Roosevelt. He warned that Nazi Germany might be developing an atomic weapon, a bomb of unimaginable power based on the newly discovered principles of nuclear fission. The letter was a stark warning. If the Nazis built this weapon first, they could hold the entire world hostage. The threat was too great to ignore. Roosevelt understood the stakes immediately. The race had begun. What followed was one of the most secret and ambitious undertakings in history, the Manhattan Project. It was a colossal effort, hidden from the public and even from most of Congress. It brought together the brightest scientific minds from across the Allied world, physicists, chemists, and engineers who were plucked from their universities and laboratories. They gathered in secret cities that sprang up overnight, places like Oak Ridge in Tennessee and Los Alamos in New Mexico. These communities were hidden behind high fences and armed guards, their true purpose known only to a select few. Their mission was singular and urgent: build an atomic bomb before the enemy could. The scientific challenges were immense. The project's leaders, like the brilliant physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, wrestled with complex theories and untested technologies. They were venturing into a new realm of physics, one where the very atoms of the universe could be unlocked to release catastrophic energy. The work was relentless, driven by the constant fear that they were in a race against Hitler's scientists. Every calculation, every experiment was a step into the unknown. They knew they were creating a weapon, but the true scale of its destructive power was something they could only theorize about. They were building a monster in the dark, hoping it would save them. Then, on July 16, 1945, in the desolate expanse of the New Mexico desert, their work reached its terrifying climax. At the Trinity test site, the world's first atomic bomb was detonated. The result was beyond anything they had imagined. A flash of light brighter than 1,000 suns lit up the pre-dawn sky. A fearsome mushroom cloud climbed miles into the atmosphere. The steel tower that held the bomb was vaporized. The desert sand was fused into green glass. Oppenheimer, watching the spectacle, famously recalled a line from Hindu scripture: "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The secret was out, the weapon was real, and now it was ready to be used. When President Roosevelt died, Vice President Harry S. Truman was thrust into the presidency. He inherited the final stages of a world war and the most terrible secret in human history, the Manhattan Project. The burden of what to do with this new weapon fell squarely on Truman's shoulders as the war in the Pacific raged. Truman was presented with stark options: continue bombing, authorize invasion, or use the bomb. Proponents argued it would end the war swiftly, saving lives and sending a message to the Soviet Union. Haunted by casualty figures and advised by leaders, Truman saw the bomb as a military weapon to end the war. He gave the order. The world was about to witness the dawn of the atomic age. Before atomic destruction, Hiroshima was known as the City of Water. 7 rivers flowed through its heart to the Sato Inland Sea. For centuries, it was a bustling regional capital. In the summer of 1945, Hiroshima tried to maintain normalcy. Children played in the streets, shopkeepers opened stores, and office workers commuted. Though a major military headquarters, the war felt distant to many. The resilient people adapted to wartime shortages, unaware of the cataclysm gathering force. Hundreds of miles southwest of Hiroshima lay Nagasaki, nestled in a valley with a deep harbor. Unlike Hiroshima, Nagasaki was a city of hills, shaped by its unique geography and centuries of international influence. Its magnificent harbor and massive shipyards were the lifeblood of Nagasaki, and a vital part of Japan's war effort. The city was divided, with the commercial heart around the harbor and the industrial zone in the Urakami Valley. Though life was constrained by war, Nagasaki had been targeted less, giving residents a fragile sense of security. They never imagined their gateway would soon become the entry point for a new horror. In the summer of 1945, a strange rumor circulated in Hiroshima. Unlike other Japanese cities, Hiroshima remained untouched, creating a dangerous illusion of safety. Air raid sirens became routine, a disruption rather than a prelude to terror, and people grew complacent. They were preparing for a known enemy, not the unknown one that would render their preparations meaningless. This illusion was a fragile shield. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were on a short list of potential targets for the atomic weapon, preserved to measure its devastating power. On August 6, 1945, the morning dawned bright over Hiroshima. The sky was a brilliant blue. After an air raid alert, the city breathed a sigh of relief. For the crew of the Enola Gay, flying high above, the Aioi Bridge was their aiming point. At 8:15 a.m., the routines of a lifetime were shattered. A man-made sun was igniting 600 meters above the Shima Hospital. The unseen shadow of the bomb was about to fall. They were the citizens of Hiroshima, an instant away from being transformed. Their final, peaceful morning was over. It was 15 minutes past 8 in the morning. High above the city, the Enola Gay's bomb bay doors opened. A single object, nicknamed Little Boy, dropped away. For 43 seconds, it fell. On the streets below, people may have looked up at the lone plane. As Little Boy reached its altitude above the Shima Hospital, the final trigger fired. The first thing anyone experienced was a light. A silent, blinding flash. A pica. This silent flash was pure energy. It imprinted permanent shadows onto the world. It was the beginning of the end for Hiroshima. The silence would not last. The flash was immediately followed by an incredible wave of heat. It was as if a sun had been born above the city. Temperatures instantly soared to thousands of degrees Celsius, hotter than the surface of the sun. In less than a second, it vaporized human beings, leaving only their shadows behind. Everything flammable within a 1-kilometer radius simply ceased to exist, consumed by the atomic fire. People's clothes ignited spontaneously. Their skin was scorched, burned away in an instant. The thermal pulse was a silent killer, claiming thousands of lives before they even heard the sound of the explosion. A deafening, world-shattering roar that was less a sound and more a physical blow. They saw the city they had just targeted being consumed by a monstrous, roiling cloud. First, the silent light, then the searing heat, and finally, the apocalyptic roar. After the heat and the sound came the wind. It was not a natural wind. It was a super hurricane, a physical wall of air moving faster than the speed of sound. This was the shock wave. It radiated outwards from the hypercenter with irresistible force, an invisible bulldozer that flattened everything in its path. In the center of the city, almost every single building was obliterated. Concrete structures were pulverized into dust. Strong steel bridges were twisted and torn from their foundations. The city's traditional wooden houses, with their heavy roof tiles, simply disintegrated. They collapsed as if they were made of matchsticks, crushing their inhabitants beneath an avalanche of timber and tile. The shockwave was a giant's fist, smashing the city into pieces. It turned the familiar landscape into a flat, featureless wasteland in a matter of seconds. Windows shattered for miles around, becoming a blizzard of razor-sharp glass shards that flew through the air like bullets. These shards sliced into people, embedding themselves deep in flesh, causing horrific injuries to those who had been shielded from the initial flash. The air was filled with a tornado of debris, planks of wood, shards of metal, roof tiles, and the personal belongings of 100,000 people, all swirling in a deadly vortex. The city was not just destroyed, it was atomized. People were picked up and thrown like dolls. They were slammed against walls or hurled hundreds of meters through the air. The pressure wave was so powerful it could strip clothing from bodies and rupture internal organs. Those inside buildings that collapsed were buried alive, trapped in the darkness beneath tons of rubble, their cries for help lost in the cacophony of destruction. Within a radius of 2 kilometers, the destruction was almost absolute. The vibrant, bustling city of Hiroshima, the city of water with its 7 rivers and graceful bridges, had been erased from the face of the earth. It was an act of annihilation on a scale never before witnessed. As the primary shockwave passed, a reverse wind rushed back in to fill the vacuum created by the explosion. This secondary blast was nearly as powerful, dragging the debris back towards the center of the city. It added to the chaos and confusion, further mangling the ruins and trapping those who had survived the initial blast. In the space of a minute, a living city had been transformed into a silent, smoking ruin. What was left was a vast, open plain of wreckage under a sky that was rapidly darkening with smoke and dust. The immediate destruction was over, but a new horror was about to begin. The shockwave had barely passed when the fires started. The intense heat flash had acted like a match, setting fire to thousands of points all over the city at the same time. The traditional Japanese houses, built of wood and paper, were perfect fuel. Curtains, tatami mats, and wooden frames ignited instantly. The collapsed buildings became massive piles of kindling. The situation was made worse by the fact that the blast had ruptured gas lines, which now fed the flames. All over the city, small fires began to burn, growing larger with every second. They began to merge, to join together, feeding off each other's energy. Within minutes, these individual fires had coalesced into a single, monstrous entity, a firestorm. This is a phenomenon of unimaginable ferocity. The intense heat from the vast sea of fire began to heat the air above it, causing it to rise rapidly. This created a powerful updraft like a chimney, which in turn sucked in cooler air from the periphery of the fire at incredible speeds. These were winds of fire, hurricane-force gales that fanned the flames, making them burn even hotter and more intensely. The city had become its own self-sustaining furnace, a raging inferno that was consuming what little the blast had left standing. The firestorm turned the ruins of Hiroshima into hell on earth. The temperatures inside the blaze reached over 1,000 degrees Celsius. It consumed all the oxygen, suffocating those who had managed to find shelter in basements or bomb shelters. It created its own weather, including terrifying fire tornadoes that danced across the scorched landscape, incinerating everything they touched. For the survivors who were still alive, dazed and horribly injured, the fire was a new and terrible enemy. They had to escape, but there was nowhere to run. The entire city was ablaze, a circle of fire that was closing in on them. Many of the injured, too weak to move, were simply consumed by the advancing wall of flames. Others, desperate to escape the unbearable heat, threw themselves into the city's rivers. But the rivers offered little relief. They were already choked with debris and the bodies of the dead. The water itself became boiling hot in places. The surface of the rivers caught fire from the leaking oil and burning debris that fell into them. For hours, the firestorm raged, completing the destruction that the initial blast had begun. It reduced the city to a uniform wasteland of ash and embers, cauterizing the wound that had been inflicted upon Hiroshima. As the firestorm raged below, a new and bizarre phenomenon began to occur in the sky above Hiroshima. The immense mushroom cloud, the symbol of this new atomic power, had climbed miles into the stratosphere. It was a terrifying column of superheated gas, dust, ash, and the vaporized remains of the city. As this radioactive brew cooled in the upper atmosphere, it mixed with moisture and condensed. The sky, which had been clear and blue just an hour before, turned a menacing dark gray. Then it began to rain. But this was no ordinary rain. It was a thick, black, greasy liquid. This was the black rain. It fell in large, heavy drops, staining everything it touched. It was a radioactive cocktail, carrying the fallout from the explosion back down to the earth. It was filled with soot, ash, dust, and highly radioactive fission products. The survivors, desperate with thirst from their burns and the intense heat of the fires, looked up at the sky and saw the rain as a miracle, a gift from heaven. They opened their mouths to catch the drops. They cupped their hands to collect the dark liquid, drinking it eagerly to quench their agonizing thirst. They had no way of knowing that this rain was poison. The black rain fell over a wide area, extending far beyond the zone of immediate destruction. It contaminated the rivers, the reservoirs, and the surrounding countryside. It poisoned the very ground the survivors stood on. By drinking this water and breathing this contaminated air, the survivors were receiving a second dose of radiation, this time internally. It was a silent, invisible attack on the very cells of their bodies. This radiation would lead to a new and mysterious illness, a sickness that would haunt the people of Hiroshima for weeks, months, and years to come, long after their physical wounds had healed. The city was now a vision of the apocalypse, a flat, smoldering plain of ash under a dark sky that wept black, poisonous tears. The immediate violent phase of the bombing was over, but the suffering of Hiroshima's people had only just begun. They were trapped in a nightmare world, surrounded by death and destruction, their bodies burned and broken, and now poisoned from the inside out. They were the first humans to experience the full horror of atomic warfare. They were the Hibakusha, the explosion-affected people, and their long, painful journey of survival was just beginning. 3 days after Hiroshima, the Japanese leadership struggled to comprehend the destruction. A second atomic mission was already underway. The B-29 bomber boxcar took off, carrying the plutonium implosion device, Fat Man. The primary target was Kokura, home to a major arsenal, but Kokura was obscured by haze. With fuel running low, Major Sweeney made a fateful choice. He abandoned Kokura and turned towards Nagasaki. For the people of Kokura, the haze was a miracle, sparing them from annihilation. The crosshairs of atomic fate were now shifting. The flight to Nagasaki was a race against time. Boxcar was critically low on fuel. As they flew south, thick clouds covered Nagasaki. Down below, in the Urakami Valley, life proceeded as normal. Unlike Hiroshima, the people of Nagasaki had some inkling of a terrible new weapon. As Boxcar approached, a break appeared in the clouds. The bombardier saw the Mitsubishi Steel and Arms Works. With fuel running out, Major Sweeney gave the order to drop the bomb. At 11:02, Fat Man was released. The fate of Nagasaki was now falling from the sky. The people in the Urakami Valley had less than a minute of their old lives left. The Fat Man bomb detonated above the Urakami Valley. The effect on the Urakami Valley was almost complete annihilation. Factories were twisted into unrecognizable skeletons. The Urakami Cathedral was utterly destroyed. The steep hills acted like a funnel containing the blast. This resulted in devastation more absolute than what was seen in Hiroshima. The old city center was largely shielded by the intervening hills. One part of the city was a radioactive wasteland, while another was damaged but still recognizably a city. The aftermath in Nagasaki was a tale of two cities. In the Urakami Valley, the scene was one of pure apocalypse. The screams of the injured echoed between the scarred hillsides. Meanwhile, in the southern part of Nagasaki, which had been shielded by the hills, the experience was different, but still terrifying. Medical facilities had been destroyed, meaning the parts of the city with the most survivors had the fewest resources to treat them. The bombing of Nagasaki is often overshadowed by Hiroshima, yet the horror for those who experienced it was just as profound. It demonstrated that Hiroshima was not a one-off event, and that the United States was willing to use these weapons repeatedly. It was now a choice between surrender and the complete annihilation of their nation. In the aftermath, Hiroshima and Nagasaki became smoldering cities of the dead. Tens of thousands perished instantly. They were mothers, fathers, children, soldiers, and workers, gone in a flash. Reduced to shadows or ash, the loss was total. Rivers choked with bodies testified to the slaughter. Streets were littered with corpses. The sweet smell of burnt flesh haunted survivors. Their task was a desperate search for loved ones. They found only more death. Mass cremations burned day and night. Identities were lost in the smoke rising from the ruins. Out of the smoking ruins, the survivors emerged, specters from a nightmare. They moved in a slow, silent procession, minds numbed, bodies injured, skin hung in peeling strips, a silent parade of the damned, escaping one hell for another. The injuries were unlike anything doctors had seen. People wandered aimlessly, disfigured beyond recognition. They were the living dead seeking escape. The immediate need was water. They drank greedily, unaware of the radioactive poison, a struggle of impossible choices, a cruel logic of the atomic bomb. In the days following the bombings, a new plague spread through the survivors. It was a mysterious illness that baffled doctors. People who seemed to be recovering began to fall ill and die. They developed a high fever, felt weak and nauseous, and suffered from vomiting and diarrhea. This was acute radiation sickness, the invisible killer released by the bomb. Their hair began to fall out, strange spots appeared on their skin, and their gums would bleed. This was the bomb's second wave of death, a delayed curse more terrifying than the blast itself. It turned their own bodies into ticking time bombs, a poison that attacked not just individuals but hope itself. For those who survived, the ordeal was far from over. They were now the Hibakusha, explosion-affected people, defined by their scars and the constant fear of radiation. The Hibakusha faced prejudice and discrimination, treated as outcasts, and forced to hide their status. The psychological trauma was profound. Many Hibakusha decided to speak out, bearing witness so that no one else would ever suffer the same fate. Their struggle transformed into a global fight for the survival of humanity itself. Their message: no more Hiroshimas. The atomic bombings and Soviet entry into the war shattered Japan's resistance. The ruling council, once deadlocked, now faced a stark choice: survival or annihilation. Emperor Hirohito broke the impasse, urging surrender to spare his people further suffering. Despite a last-minute coup attempt, the emperor's recorded message reached the nation on August 15, 1945. For the first time, the Japanese people heard their emperor's voice, accepting the Potsdam Declaration and calling for peace. The war was over. The atomic bombs forced a surrender, but also unleashed a terrifying new era. The silence that followed was heavy, not just with relief, but with the ominous dawn of the atomic age. News of Japan's surrender sparked global celebration, but the reality of atomic destruction soon set in. Images from Hiroshima and Nagasaki revealed devastation beyond comprehension. A single bomb leveling a city, a new sickness haunting survivors. Scientists, once proud, now felt horror at what they'd unleashed. Oppenheimer spoke for many. "I feel I have blood on my hands." The bomb changed everything. Humanity now possessed the power to destroy itself. Victory was shadowed by existential dread. The world had entered a new, anxious era. The mushroom cloud became a symbol, not just of triumph, but of a fear that would never fully fade. The atomic bomb ended World War II, but ignited a new conflict, the Cold War. The US and Soviet Union, once uneasy allies, now faced off, each racing to control nuclear power. The bomb was both a warning and a challenge. Stalin responded by launching the Soviet atomic program. By 1949, both superpowers had nuclear weapons. The world was divided, living under the threat of mutually assured destruction. War itself was redefined. Peace became a tense standoff, with civilization's fate hanging on a button. Hiroshima and Nagasaki marked not just an end, but the beginning of a world perpetually on the brink. The legacy of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is not just historical, it's biological. Radiation scarred survivors, the Hibakusha, and haunted their descendants with fears of genetic damage. While studies found no dramatic rise in birth defects, the psychological toll was immense, a shadow over generations. The bomb's true horror lies in its attack on life's very foundation, corrupting the promise of a healthy future. The story of the atomic bomb is now written in our DNA, a warning carried forward in every cell. The consequences of nuclear war echo through time, a legacy of suffering and fear we must never repeat. Today, Hiroshima and Nagasaki are vibrant cities, rebuilt from devastation. At their hearts lie memorials, silent witnesses to the horror and sanctuaries for remembrance. Each year, the cities pause to honor the dead and renew a plea for peace, the tolling of bells marking the moment of destruction. These acts of remembrance are not about blame, but about learning and warning. The message is universal: never again. By remembering, we arm ourselves against repeating history. The true cost of nuclear weapons is measured not in strategy but in human lives, an enduring lesson for all. The end of the Cold War brought optimism as the threat of nuclear war seemed to recede. Treaties were signed, arsenals reduced, and the fear began to fade. However, this sense of security has proven to be a dangerous illusion. The nuclear threat simply changed its shape. The greater fear now comes from nuclear proliferation to unstable regions. The doomsday clock remains perilously close to midnight. Thousands of nuclear weapons remain on high alert, capable of destroying civilization. A single miscalculation or technological failure could lead to catastrophe. We are living with the bomb. The lessons of 1945 are more urgent than ever. The story of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is a direct warning to our present and future. Out of the ashes, the Hibakusha offer a profound gift, their testimony. They share their stories to ensure no one experiences what they did. Their voices urge empathy, compelling us to see the human faces behind war. Their testimony is an appeal to our shared humanity. We face a choice, a world of fear, or one free of nuclear weapons. It is a difficult path, but the only one leading to lasting peace. The story of Hiroshima is about the choices we make today. It is the hope that we can choose empathy in life. Our future is a choice we must make every day.